Create in me a clean, clean heart. Create in me a work of art. Create in me a miracle. Something real, something beautiful. Create in me a clean, clean heart. Create in me a work of art. Create in me a miracle. Something real, something beautiful. You're not finished with me yet. You're not finished with me yet. By your power I can change, I can change. 'Cause you're not finished with me yet. Not finished with me yet. You're not finished with me yet. By your power I can change, I can change. You're not finished with me yet. Create in me a clean, clean heart. Create in me a work of art. Create in me a miracle. Something real, something beautiful. Yay.
Good morning, Grove. How are you guys doing today? You doing good? Welcome. Welcome, everybody. And if you're new to the Grove, welcome to you. At this time, we would love to invite you to stand if you're able and just say hi to your neighbors and people around. And then we're going to continue in worship.
Good. Sorry I was so lost. I was like, I was all over.
I jumped back into the chorus too fast.
I didn't
And
even
then
know.
you were just like, oh, hey.
Sorry. I tried.
That was great. Hey, I'm not hurting myself pushing on it. It feels better. Okay. Back where it goes. I'm just making sure. I just noticed like I'm pushing my guitar into it.
Yeah.
Okay. Just saying. I did it. I don't know if I'm wrong. Do you want me to? I don't think I'm supposed to say anything else again. I think you just restart. Oh wait, he's doing it. Sorry, I missed that. Check mark.
Hopefully you all had a chance to say hello to somebody. If you want to grab a seat real quick, a couple of announcements I'd like to make. Again, my name is Jeff, if you're visiting today. wasn't here last week. Last week we had that awesome opportunity to take our firstborn to college and drop her off. And so thank you for covering for us last week, guys. A couple things. Pub Theology is our opportunity to be in the community and talk about God and faith and life and how those things come together and sometimes work and sometimes don't. We do that Thursday nights at 7 p.m. at the Yard in Bryson. It's that new place that there between Anthony's and CJ's. Just time to come together, grab a drink, whatever you want, and we sit and talk. And so it's a real nice time to be there. And so if you can make that, that's Thursday nights at 7 o'clock at the Yard. Our teens are going to continue to meet tonight and next Sunday night. They meet from 6 to 8 p.m. here at the Grove Church and upstairs. They have food to start with, and then middle school or high schools, they kind of have a conversation together. They can be dropped off 5:45-ish kind of thing, picked up at 8 o'clock. We're doing something new once the school year starts. I know school starts technically tomorrow. Sorry, FYI for some of you. But we're all excited. But in a few weeks, the first Sunday in September, we're going to move our middle school and high school program to Sunday mornings. And this is what it's going to look like. We're going to offer at 10:30 a middle school, high school group upstairs. They're going to have the same kind of, we're going to do some breakfast stuff up there and hang out and have conversation. It's not that they're not welcome to being part of this place, but we know that nights are crazy right now. And some of you who play soccer, your coach made you practice like 5 days a week, right, Coach? Is making you guys go there like so much. And so we're like, we don't want to take another evening away from family time and rest, recouping for Monday morning. So we are going to move our program for teens to Sunday mornings. And so we'll have a rotation of youth leaders. If you want to volunteer to be a youth leader, we're going to rotate that on Sunday mornings, have a great chance to get together and hang out and talk. So if you're middle school, high school students, in September, we're going to start something new here. Last week, if you weren't here, Matt did an amazing job talking about Genesis and origin stories. If you missed it, it's on YouTube. That's how I watched it. It was a great time just to kind of go back to these stories that shaped us and relook at what they mean for us today. And he did an amazing job with the creation piece of that. And so we were talking about origins, and it got me thinking about the idea of where you come from, like where is home for you? What is home for you? And I love things that remind me of where I'm from. I grew up in Northwest Ohio, just right on the Michigan line, so we were kind of South Detroit is what I claim. But I love things from the North. I love things that remind me of the North. And this last week, very jealous, but Liz got to go to the most beautiful place in the world. It was the Upper Peninsula in northern Michigan. And she was there and took a lot of photos and made me extremely jealous and teased me a lot of things. Oh, you should be here. And I'm like, oh, we should all get a house up here. And I said, hey, one day we'll get a house and we'll Airbnb it.
Almost didn't come back.
So almost didn't come back. I'm glad you came back, Liz. But she brought back some really cool things, some stickers for me. She brought a magnet, and she brought me a coaster of Michigan, the state of Michigan. And I'm like, I just love those things. I love bumper stickers. I love T-shirts, Michigan shirts. I love when my kids, I see them wearing Michigan shirts, and it just reminds me of where I'm from when I see those things. And so this last week, taking Maisie to college, I went into her room to do one last sweep to make sure she had everything. And I saw on her far side of the bed, on the ground was her Michigan hoodie, blue Michigan hoodie that I had bought her with yellow Michigan across it. It was my favorite hoodie that she has. And it was still in her room, and everything was packed in the cars. I'm like, this has to be a mistake, right? She has to have this sweatshirt at school with her. So, and Jody was like, oh, she already has too many sweatshirts. She was going to leave that one. And so I said, well, I'll open a new bag up and we'll start a new bag because she needs the sweatshirt. So I went and I got a new bag and I put it in the bottom and put some things on top of it because I'm like, she has to take this. And we getting ready to leave, and I see the Michigan hoodie has now made it outside the bag again. I'm like, what's going on here? I tucked it down to the bottom. And she's like, oh, she just doesn't want to take it too much stuff. And I'm like, she has to have it. So I put it in the car, and we took it, and we went and we stayed the night in a hotel before we moved in the next day. And it was cold in the hotel. For some reason, people always say I turn the AC on too cold. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that at all. I feel like it's just right in here. So she uses the Michigan hoodie that night, and then she packs all her stuff, and she goes on. She had her own car. She went on to school, and then we were gathering the stuff. And that she left the Michigan hoodie in the hotel room. I'm like, there's something wrong. She's just nervous. She's like lost her mind. So I'm like, we're gonna take it because I'm like, she has to have it. So we took it. We got there, and Jody's like, oh, you left some dirty clothes at the hotel and stuff like that. She's like, oh, I don't want to take those things. I just left those things. I don't want to take it. And I was like, oh, she's not gonna take it. And so we packed up later on, left, and Jody's like, I'm like, shuffling the car around, getting ready to go, and she's like, she came and took the sweatshirt. So I was like, oh, she took it. So she came back and got it. So anyway, neat story that she has the hoodie with her. Anyways, I loved all that to say is Michigan, she has the hoodie there. So that was a great story, right? So my question to you today, I'm going to give you a chance to talk to those around you, is what is your origin story? Like, where are you from? Like, what things do you do, or phrases that you say, or food that you eat, like, would help identify you where you came from? Liz is like, hey, have you ever heard of a pasty? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, churches in Michigan sold pasties for fundraisers all the time. And it was a baked fried pie, almost like. You can put anything in it, meat, cheese, fruits, and stuff in there. It's like a pierogi. Pierogies are boiled. Pasties are baked. But it was a northern food. And so she actually brought me back some chocolate from the UP as well. But that's a food, I don't eat grits. I've never had grits in my life. Grits, I think south, and it's the one thing I'm holding on to. I'm not going to eat grits because I'm from the north, so I don't mean to offend you, but I've never eaten grits. And the story goes is because when I was a kid, my mom would make sausage in the little white hard pieces to eat. She said, those are the grits. And I didn't understand how anyone could eat a bowl of grits. And so I never ate a bowl of grits because I thought they were the hard pieces of little sausages. And so I'm an adult. I know they're not that anymore, but I still don't. Cream of wheat? Anybody eat cream of wheat? No. Yeah, okay. Cream of wheat, fantastic. All right, so question to you. I'll share with those around you. Origin stories. Where are you from? What things do you do that would associate you with where you came from? Maybe you're from here, so when you go other places, what things do you say or do that people go, where are you from? Like you must be from Appalachia, whatever that means. That's a great thing, right? So take a minute, talk to those around you. Tell us your origin story, where you're from, and maybe some things that you say or do or eat that remind you of home.
Chicken and dressing. Do y'all have chicken and dressing? Arkansas and Alabama, one of the things that connected Matt and I is both of our families had that, and they cooked it the same way. But it's just basically like at Thanksgiving, instead of stuffing, like there's a huge difference between stuffing and dressing. Dressing is like cornbread base, and then there are pieces of chicken in it, and then you put cranberry sauce with it. I know, it's weird. There you go. That's part of the origin. Yeah. Anybody else have food?
Crabs and sauerkraut.
I don't do sauerkraut. My dad loves sauerkraut.
Sauerkraut with Thanksgiving dinner.
What would you have
Change your life.
with sauerkraut with Thanksgiving? Like what was Thanksgiving? Turkey and
Yeah, everything else is the same, but you add the sauerkraut, and it's good with everything. It's so good. Especially with the cranberry sauce. Like my favorite thing is the next day. I put the whole Thanksgiving meal into, Thanksgiving meal into
that the one I gave you? Did I
a
give you
tortilla. You didn't give me one.
What, you just joined
I
me?
ordered it. Yeah.
So bad. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I love it.
Anyway, that's
All right, what about you?
when I think of home, being Georgia, I think of pecans and red clay.
Yeah.
And how I argue, like people are like, "Oh, you're from Georgia, they're pecans." I'm like, "No, they're not."
It's a certain part of Georgia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're pecans.
pecans. Okay, good.
Pulled pork. So like I grew up in eastern North Carolina, so it's like the vinegar base.
Vinegar base, yeah,
pulled pork, and it's I don't eat it now, but it's so good. Like so, and y'all, we
Oh,
say
the word y'all. I was gonna mention that.
Yeah, yeah,
When I moved to Missouri, that was a no-go.
yeah.
You
Oh,
cannot
last week
say
was
y'all.
a whole bunch of these guys.
These guys is
Oh,
yeah.
you know what's native to here?
Yuns.
Yuns. That's a literally specific. Because I grew up in Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
It's a very mountainy.
Yeah.
Yuns.
I asked them, and I was like, "That doesn't make sense," because like y'all is you all, and they're like, "Yeah, it's you one, you ones." I was like,
Yuns? What? Yuns.
So
Yeah.
barbecue in Maryland is beef brisket.
Yeah.
And there's no
Never
sauce.
went really fast.
It's thinly sliced, hopefully medium rare brisket with horseradish and shaved white onions. Yeah, so I had never had pulled pork until I moved here.
It's definitely more used to be my
Yeah. Yeah. Please. They're a little more
All right. I hope that you learned something fun about the people that are around you, where they're from. Roll Tide. I grew up in the same area as Jeff, so whenever he talks about those stories of up north, it just definitely reminds me of growing up. And it was a good thing that Jeff was a Michigan fan, because he would have not fit in or been able to be a part of our family if he wasn't. So it kind of worked out in its way. My grandfather was a huge Michigan fan, and even when he passed away, his whole funeral was done in Michigan, U of M, everything. Everything was U of M. So that's just kind of a neat little detail about our lives. It's important to know where we're from and to think about where we've come and things that are special to us that we hold in high regard, whether it's a thing to eat or a place to go. But those are important details that make us who we are, right? So in that same idea, thinking about who we are, there's a lot of details about life and connection with God and who we are. And so we're going to talk more about that today. And now, though, we're going to take a moment to continue on in worship. And I'm going to start us off with a prayer. And I would love if you're able to stand, if you would join me. And then these beautiful voices are going to lead us into some songs. But I'm going to read us a prayer to get us kind of in the mindset of worship, and it's called Praise Be to You. So if you'd like to close your eyes or just listen to the words and make this a prayer of your heart, offering it up to God as we prepare to sing. Praise be to you, God of life, for the shoot that breaks through the earth, that strains towards the sun, that blossoms and makes of its fruit an offering to the world. Praise be to you, God of life, for the seed that dies and is resurrected into tree, for the tree whose longevity whispers a parable of eternity. Praise be to you, God of life, for your presence and purpose that infuses all of creation and calls us to follow you, to embrace life, to share life, and to offer the fruit of our lives as a worship to you. Let us worship together.
From the highest of heights to the depths of the sea, creation's revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring, every creature unique in the song that it sings, all exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God, all powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim. You are amazing, God. Who has told every lightning bolt where it should go, or seen heavenly storehouses laden with snow? Who imagined the sun and gives source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolness of night? None can fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. You are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable, you place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. I lift my eyes up to the hills. This my morning song, where my strength comes from. I lift my eyes up to the hills. This my evening song, where my help comes from. This is the gravity of love. Just as the moon follows the sun, you're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land. Just as the universe expands, your love is reaching. You're holding everything. We lift our eyes up to the hills. When will our help come? Lord, we cry, how long? We lift our eyes up to the hills. Even as we run, hope is chasing us. This is the gravity of love. Just as the moon follows the sun, you're all around me. You're holding everything. This is the hope of every land. Just as the universe expands, your love is reaching. You're holding everything. I lift my eyes up to the hills. This my morning song, where my strength comes from.
You can remain standing. We are going to sing one more song together. But I want to read another prayer for us as we're worshiping, and this is called A Vision of Beauty. If our world needs anything, God is a new vision of beauty. When we hate and make war on each other, we need to recognize the beauty in those who are different from us. when we exploit and rape the earth that sustains us and the creatures that call it home, we need to recognize the beauty of its creation. When we fear and hide and run from life's dangers, we need to recognize the beauty in living. When we suffer and grieve and die, we need to remember that beauty even remains in the darkness. Teach us to know and to love all that is beautiful, O God. Lead us into beautiful lives that open the senses of others to glory and wonder. And through us, let the beauty of your kingdom take root just a little more in our midst. For the sake of Jesus and his loving, saving purpose, we pray. Amen.
All this pain, I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life will really change at all this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. All around, hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things.
You may be seated.
So Matt is coming, but from now, we don't know where he is because he was supposed to walk up here, so you get to talk to me for just a moment. We start school tomorrow, and I'm not prepared. So we do want to, on that note, I will say this, and I forgot to mention this earlier, we were able to get the Operation Backpack stuff collected and assembled and delivered this week, and it was really remarkable. We had 26 foster kids in Swain County that were placed in homes, not just in Swain, but in surrounding areas, and we were able to cover all 26 bags with the supplies. And so I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that participated in that. So many of you took the time to adopt one of those bags and put those supplies together. So thank you, and you guys are amazing. And I know on behalf of DSS and social services, they were very, very grateful. So good job and thank you. And I don't have any good jokes or any more fun stories to tell you. So without further ado, Matt Hewitt.
I apologize for being a little late. I stepped outside. Don't want to get into this too much, but I do want to just pass what I know to Nicole because I know you'll be worrying about it. We have a couple of dogs, and they're elderly in age, and one was taken to the emergency room in Junaluska last night. It was confirmed she has kidney disease, and so they were calling to let us know that her numbers are trending the right way. She does need to stay another day. But we'll talk more about it later. Okay. If you guys can send prayers for, we have one that was just diagnosed with inoperable cancer and another that just was diagnosed with kidney disease. And we don't have kids. These are our kids. So anyway, I'm really stoked about our talk today, and I just want to let you know at the very beginning, I'm not going to spend much time talking about what we talked about last week, which was origin stories in the world of Genesis 1 and so forth, how we read the scriptures, how those scriptures came to be. But I am going to do a couple of things today. This is my plan for you. If you can think of this talk in three modes or sections. The first, I'm going to nerd out on you a little bit, okay? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to try to do it fast. If you want to talk about it later, I've got the resources listed here for you, and we're going to be able to sit down over a beverage, whether that's coffee or beer or tea, and we can nerd out some more if you have some direct questions about all these things. The second part is I do want to bring Adam and Eve into this story. So we kind of talk about the cosmological background, and we're going to start with the world of Adam and Eve today, but then I want to talk a little bit about Adam and Eve and how they're treated in the scriptures. And then thirdly, I want to talk about when we read the Bible literarily, not just literally. In other words, when we respect it enough to allow it to be what it is, how do we mine it for truth? How do we meet the relationship? How do we meet and have relationship with the God who is the author of it? And what does it mean for us today? So the very first thing is we're going to talk about Genesis origins, as Jeff mentioned, Adam and Eve in the world. And let me, one more thing, I can't move past this. God might smite me dead in front of you if I did. Give grits a try. Just try. I tried cream of wheat once. That was it. All right. So when we're talking about origins and the world of Adam and Eve, we have a lot to say about these things. And I do want to mention to you that we have some resources here. Cannon, do you have that slide with the resources on there? Maybe not. It's a picture of 3 books, but I want you to know that a lot of this material is taken from Adam Walton's The Lost World of Genesis 1 and 2, The Lost World of Adam and Eve. Also, Pete Enns, The Evolution of Adam, The Understanding of the Historical Adam. So just know that those are resources available to you, much like I used Inspired by Rachel Held Evans last week. I'm going to use a lot of this, so if it's good, it came from them. If it's not good, it came from me. Just know that, okay? So let's start with this. Biblical authority is tied inseparably to the author's intention, okay? The author's intention is what we're looking for when we're reading the scriptures. God vested God's authority in a human author, so we must consider what that human author intended to communicate if we want to understand God's message. 2 voices speak, that of God and that of humanity, but the human author is our doorway into the room of God's meaning and message. And so that means that when we read the book of Genesis, we're reading an ancient document and should begin by using only the assumptions that would be appropriate for the ancient world. We must understand how the ancients thought and what ideas underlie and underlay their communication. So proposing today that in the Bible, God has accommodated the communicator and immediate audience and joined the communicator in a high context communication appropriate to the audience. That means who that original intended audience was for God to speak to through these ancient scriptures is going to be highly contextualized. They're going to understand and know their world inherently in a way that you and I can't. We're thousands of years removed. So we can understand some things, but we're going to have to do our very best, as I said last week, to enter into what Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament scholar, wonderful preacher and poet, calls a second naivete, reading it as the intended audience would read it. So when we read the Bible, we enter the context of that communication as low-context outsiders who need to use all our inferential tools to discern the nature of the communication's elocution and meaning. We have to use research to fill in all the information that would not have to be said by the prophet in his high context communication to his audience. This is how we as modern readers must interact with an ancient text. This morning, I have switched from science to English. I am teaching English 3, which is American Lit, to juniors this year. And I'm doing it for the first time at a high school level. And I'm looking at how other teachers approach this. And we're basically going to read works that start with readings, both historical from that time, place, and current that reflect back on them. Everything from indigenous people, creation myths of the Cherokees, all the way up to the Great Awakening with Cotton Mather and Jonathan Edwards, all the way back to the Civil War, and then to Jim Crow, and then all the way past that, talking about everything from Gatsby and decadence in the 20s to Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath with Great Depression, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to have to teach my students, as you were taught in your English classes, in your literature classes, when we're reading a book set in a certain time and a context, we have to do our very best to research that time and context so that we can feel what those characters were feeling. We can understand the world the way those characters were understanding the world at their time and their specific place and context. We have to do the same thing if we want to be honest and we want to treat the Bible with the respect and the honor that it deserves. So, we are obliged to respect that text by recognizing the sort of text that it is, and the nature of the message that it offers. That's important. And in that regard, we have long recognized that the Bible is not a scientific textbook. That is, God's intention is not to teach science or to reveal science. God does reveal God's work in the world, but God doesn't reveal how the world works, not in the way that we understand it. So, again, authority is tied to the message. The author intends to communicate as that agent, as that inspiration, as that author of God's revelation. God has accommodated God's self to the world of ancient Israel to initiate that revelation. And so that we recognize that although the Bible is written for us, indeed, it's written for everyone, even those who have yet to come, it is not written to us as the original author. In its context, it is not communicated in our language. Genesis was not written in American English. It was written in Hebrew, and not even modern Hebrew, but ancient Hebrew. It's not written to us in its context. It's not communicated in our language. It's not addressed to our culture. Remember, the world of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is not a world with telescopes. It's not a world with NASA. It's not a world with even the understanding of a Sir Isaac Newton. It's not a world that way at all. It does not anticipate the questions about the world and its operations that stem from our modern situations and issues. If we read modern ideas into the text, we skirt the authority of the text. And in effect, what we're doing is we're compromising it. We're arrogating authority to ourselves and to our ideas. We're placing ourselves at the center. And this is especially true when we interpret the text as if it is making reference to modern science, of which the author and the audience of Genesis had no knowledge. Say this, or in your head with me, think this: the text cannot mean what it never meant. The text cannot mean what it never meant. Which brings us to, in the ancient world and in the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible, when we're talking about creating focuses on establishing order by assigning roles and functions. It's all about authority, who's in charge. It's all about order and control. What are the functions? Our procedure then is first to set aside our own cultural assumptions as much as we're able to, and then try to read the text for what it is saying. Armed with our insights from a study of the text, we then take a look at the broader ancient Near Eastern cultural context, those other cultures and religions that were surrounding the ancient Israelites and Hebrews, those of their captors, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, who would at times be the empire or prevailing power politically that would enslave those Jewish folks. So we take a look at that broader cultural context to determine in which ways the Bible shows a common understanding, and to identify ways in which God's revelation lifted the Israelites out of their familiar ways of thinking with a new vision of reality. We told a long story last week about how a little girl came in from the streets of Babylon to discuss how she was being told the earth started, and that her Jewish mother and father said, well, we're going to tell you a different way that the world came to be. And that was a polemic, P-O-L-E-M-I-C. In other words, a means by which taking a common worldview, common literary understanding, in this account, a creation story, an origin story, and telling it so that there is means by which we compare and contrast. If you remember last week, we talked about the Babylonian understanding, the Assyrian understanding of creation coming out of chaos and violence. that the god Marduk went against his great-grandmother, the god sea monster Tiamat, and slew her. And out of her stomach, out of her body was created the heaven and the earth. And that the gods used the blood to create humans so that they could be slaves and that they could do what the gods didn't want to do themselves. But the Jewish understanding is no, it's not a God who slays another God. It's one God who speaks into existence out of order and control and peace and fills the world with that order and treats humanity not as slaves, but as those made in God's image, into the degree that God actually was heard in the account of Genesis to walk with them in the day. Similar understanding, similar cosmology, similar literary devices, but a very different message to how the world was formed. We cannot start by asking the Bible our scientific questions. The Bible's not revealing science, and the biblical authors and audience would be neither aware or concerned with a scientific way of thinking. Our questions would not resonate in their minds, and neither would they even have meaning to them. Let's talk a little bit about that again. Here's a figure. This is taken from Victor P. Hamilton's, I think, Handbook of the Pentateuch. You can see here that what's happening is that this is an idea of order. Genesis day 1, 2, and 3, light, heavens, earth, edible vegetation, is about creating and assigning. It's about creating functions. It's about separation and order, so that day 4, 5, and 6 are about filling in day 1, 2, and 3. Day 1, light. Day 4, we have the luminaries. The sun, the moon, the stars. Day 2, we have the heavens. Day 5, we have fish and bird. The heavens are also created with separation from the sea. Day 3, earth and edible vegetation. Day 6, land, animals, and mankind, humanity, come from this. And day 7 is important because it's a day of rest, of reflection, of seeing that what God made was good, and it was very good. So this is important to note again, that this is not chaos. This is not violence. There's an orderly fashion to the world, and what these ancient Israeli, these ancient Hebrew authors and writers, poets and philosophers were saying is that the world is ordered, and it's good, and we're a part of it. If we look next, if I can get my computer to operate the correct way, well, we will see that the image of God as an Old Testament or Jewish Bible concept can be understood in 4 categories. It pertains to 1, the role and function that God has given humanity. Found, for example, in the admonition that God gives in Genesis 1:28 to mankind to subdue and to rule. It speaks to 2, the identity that God has bequeathed on us. By definition, who we are as human beings and the way that we serve as God's substitute by representing God's presence in the world. Finally, it is indicative of a relationship that God intends to have with us, that God intends to have with us. So the first thing here, right? These 4 aspects are not just to the individuals mentioned, Adam and Eve, in this account, but more importantly to the corporate species. They have import and intendance for all of humanity through the understanding of these archetypal humans, Adam and Eve. So number 1, we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Role and function, that we are to be stewards, that God has entrusted the earth to us, that we are to love it and treat it well. part 2 here, this identity that we're created in the image of God and all the things that that means. Primarily, it means that we're going to talk later, icons, that we're created to have relationship with God, self, others, and the creation as a whole. And that we're to serve as God's substitute. In those ancient customs and cultures and nations, take for example the Assyrian nation. If you went to the border of the Assyrian nation, you got to the edge of it, there would be a image, there would be a statue, there would be a token representation of the king. If you went all the way as far as you can this way geographically and you came to the edge of that kingdom, there would be one of those as well. And what that basically said, that denoted that that was the kingdom of that king. When God created humanity in God's image, he was saying that wherever we are, God is also. God's presence fills the whole of the earth. Let's put it this way. There's a difference between a house story versus a home story. Okay? When you go to buy a house, okay, or when you're building a house, there's a couple of different things that happen. One is you want to inspect the materials. You want to make sure that the foundation is sound. You want to make sure that the walls are sound. You want to know its general layout and plan. You want to know if it has, so to speak, good bones, is what realtors will often say. Even if a house isn't in the shape that you want it to be in, the house has got good bones. In other words, we can fix this up. So that takes place. But there's also this idea of how are we going to take this building, this house, and convert it to a home? And that's when the individuals walk through and they envision this room and they say, oh, this could be the master bedroom. Oh, this could be children's bedroom. Oh, Johnny's going to love this piece of the house as his bedroom because it looks over the backyard. All right, we're going to make this the living room, but we're going to make this the den and the study. And the way we do that is we envision what furniture are we going to put in here that makes that happen, that makes that happen, that makes that happen. And in those ways, we take a house, a building, and we turn it into a home to serve our relational and communal needs. Well, the ancients, when they hear the story of Adam and Eve, when they hear the story of creation, when they hear the story of Genesis 1 and 3, they were not looking for a house story as much as they were looking for a home story. In the ancient world, people were far more interested in the origins of the home than in the origins of the house. It's a question of which story to tell. They're not interested in how the material objects of the house came into being. God did it, and that was enough for them. Of much more interest to them was how this house, the cosmos, or all that we know, had become a home for humans, but even more importantly, how God had made it God's home. So understanding the varied use of the term, right, Adam is going to help us understand that. Now we're moving into phase 2. So phase 1 was kind of, this is the world, this is the context, this is the background of the story in which Adam and Eve are going to be placed. And you know the account in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2 that God made the earth as we looked at that chart, and on day 6, God made humanity. God said, let us make mankind in our image, and he made them male and female. He looked, and it was very good. Genesis 2, we're going to see, is a deeper exploration, a sequel, if you will, to that story. But what do we do with Adam and Eve? Well, again, I'm going to give you just some little scientific pieces in here. And by science, I mean the science of hermeneutics, of how we read the Bible, how we understand it contextually. We have to understand that the varied use of the term Adam, is essential to sorting out the early chapters of Genesis. The first is that the word Adam is a Hebrew word meaning human. Regarding this observation, the fact that it is Hebrew indicates that the category designation human is imposed by those who spoke Hebrew. In other words, because Hebrew was not a language at the time of creation, Adam and Eve would not have called each other these names because whatever they spoke, it wasn't Hebrew. Hebrew does not exist as a language until somewhere in the middle of the second millennium BC. And so if Adam, which means human, Eve, which means living, mother of all living, are not historical names, then they must be assigned names intended by the Hebrew-speaking users to convey a particular meaning. In English, if we read that someone's name is human and his partner's name is life, we quickly develop an impression of what is being communicated. Like an example, when Paul Bunyan wrote, or John Bunyan, not Paul Bunyan, that was a different dude altogether. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress. His characters were named Christian and faithful and hopeful. And these characters, by virtue of their assigned names, are larger than the historical characters to whom they refer. They were archetypes. They were means to display about a lot more about a lot of people than just those individual characters in the story. They represent something beyond themselves. And consequently, we can see from the start that the interpretation may not be as straightforward as we think it might. More is going on than giving some biographical information about two people or history when we're reading these origin accounts. In terms of the variety of these uses, in Genesis 1:5, we find that in some cases, Adam refers to human beings as a species. In others, it refers to the male individual of the species. And in some, it refers to the designation of a particular individual as the equivalent of a personal name. The way these things are separated is by the adjective, the article at the beginning of that statement. So morphologically, that's a way we talk about the shape of language by form. The single distinction is whether the definite article, the, is attached or not. The human, the Adam. Syntactically, by its role in the sentence, what we're looking for is the single distinction is whether it is treated as a corporate plurality. In other words, is this standing for the race of humans? Or is this being the singular being of the Adam and the Eve of the story itself? And the use of the word Adam in the book of Genesis 22 times, it's got a definite article. 3 times, it's got an attached preposition. 9 times, no definite article or preposition. We have to make some interpretive choices there. Again, we can geek out over some coffee or tea if you want to with that. Beer may even be more appropriate if we're going to get into ancient Hebrew. But we're looking now, for just an instance, these ancient people didn't have tea. They didn't have Coke. They didn't have coffee. Those beverages have not been invented yet. They did have beer, okay? Just say it. All right. Now, if we're moving into this account, this background, this contextualization of all, we see that the second creation account, which is Genesis 2:4 through 24, can be viewed as a sequel rather than as a recapitulation of day 6 and Genesis 1 through 23, that account. Now, that was how I was taught. I was taught that Genesis 1 was the large story, and then Genesis 2 was microscoping it in just to look at day 6 and how that worked. But there are problems with that. The first is the order of events. If you want to say that they're the same exact story, then we have some issues that are right there in the text itself. Because according to Genesis 1, you had seen that chart, right? We had the earth formed, and then we had plants well before that. We had plants on day 3. Then we had, after the animals of the land were formed, then we had humanity, mankind, male and female. But according to chapter 2, Adam is created first, the male, then the plants are created, then the animals are created, which he's caused to name, and then God puts him to sleep, removes a rib from him, which is also an archetypal understanding of how that happened, and out of that came Eve. So it's really different order of events. If we want to read it literally and scientifically, it's not good science. If we let it be what it is, a story about not how it came to be as much as how it was ordered and how there was authority given and how it wasn't chaos and how it was peace and not violence and how humanity is created in the image of God, then we have lots of latitude to work with it that way. Also, that whole task of Adam being able to tame all the animals in 24 hours, not sure how that works. Seems like a little bit of a stretch for us scientifically. So if it's a sequel, we don't have to worry about fitting Genesis 2 into day 6. But if they're sequels, it means that people in Genesis 1 may not be Adam and Eve. Or at least not only Adam and Eve. The question would then be why we have a forming account like Genesis 2 sometime after the creation of people as reported in Genesis 1. So if Genesis 1 recounts the creation of all humanity in God's image as it presents the idea that God has ordered sacred space to function on the behalf of God. Again, I mentioned it last week, but the idea that this arose during the Babylonian exile, that these writings came at the point in time when the Hebrews, who had had King David, who had had the city of Jerusalem, who had had a temple and a palace and all those things, when the Babylonians, the Assyrians came in and took that all away, and now they're in exile, basically in slavery, to this occupying superpower that is Babylon, then all of a sudden it's important. We don't have a temple. What do? How do we worship our God? Well, through this, we reflect in this Genesis 1 account that, hey, the entire cosmos is Yahweh, God's temple. It's not just a building. It's all of it, built with majesty, imbued with God's presence and power. And as humans, we have a priestly role to enact God's order and love and relationship into the cosmos. Even when our church building is taken away, that does not prohibit us from worshiping our God. That's important. Genesis 1 pertains to generic humanity as indicated by the indefinite term used. And this coincides well with the common way of reporting the creation of humans in the ancient world. So it's no surprise that generic humanity is the referent. Genesis 1 does not report the mechanisms or processes used in the creative act. They indicate only that it is an act of God. And just as Genesis 1 began with a state of non-order in the larger cosmos, Genesis 2 begins with a state of non-order in the terrestrial realm. Genesis 2 explains how humans function in sacred space, and on the behalf, in contrast to Genesis 1, which addresses how sacred space functions for humanity. Genesis 2 locates the center of the sacred space, the garden, in contrast to Genesis 1, which only indicated the cosmos was set up to be that sacred space. All right, I'm done nerding out. And you all say, thank you, Jesus. That was not going to help me this week. It may help you with how to approach the scriptures as you move forward. Question then. So what? How do we read this? What meanings can we draw from this? So many. The first thing I want to point out today, though, is that we are made in the image of God. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Cannon, if you will. Please, sir. We are made in the image of God. In our youth group, we talk about the fact that we're made to grow deeper in our ability to love God, self, others, and creation. We are relational beings. Scott McKnight, who we've talked about in the past in this in our community, in this church, talks about icons. E-I-K-O-N is the word he uses, which means that, again, that idea of representative. When we see humanity, we should be seeing God. When we see creation, we should be understanding attributes and qualities of the creator of that creation. So we are relational beings. We're stewards. Humans are, at least as humans say it, we're the height, we're the apex, we're the top of the species. Okay? And as a result of that, we can invoke the great American theologian Peter Parker, also known as Spider-Man, that with great power comes great responsibility. We're meant to be stewards. We're meant to take care of this world around us, including ourselves and those other human beings that are still creatures, not creators in the sense that God is. We are to name and not to label. One of the most fascinating aspects of this whole Genesis account, what we normally refer to as the fall, is that Adam's, the human, his first responsibility and task was to name the animals. To name something, you have to know it. You have to examine it. You have to have a relationship with it some way. And then you name it. And name connotes relationship and intimacy. I don't just call my animals, my pets, hey dog, hey cat. Sometimes when I'm angry. But most of the time it's, hey Spectre, hey Roxy, hey Merton. Nicole takes it a step further and it becomes Roxy Roo and Specky, and Merton, somehow named after the great theologian Thomas Merton, is Furry Murray. But there's this understanding that we name. You see, when we label things, we're stripping them of that intimacy. You don't bomb people that you know on an intimate level by name. You bomb those blacks. You bomb those Muslims. You bomb those Western Christians. You bomb people. You may be registered as a Democrat or as a Republican, but if I don't call you by your name, but instead I call you liberal hippie, or I call you libertard, or I call you dang fundamentalist, when I get into that, that's labeling. And that's when we're able to do violence to one another instead of knowing the relationship that it connects us together as humanity. So we're created, especially if we're going to follow the idea of our God and if we're going to be Christ-like. Have you ever noticed that God likes to change names? Hey, you're Jacob, which means heel grabber and deceiver. That's what your family gave you. That's the name they gave you. And you've lived that out pretty well. But I'm going to wrestle with you now, and you're going to hold on to me until you get your blessing. And now, you know what? Your name isn't heel grabber. Your name's not deceiver or Jacob. Your name's Israel. It's because you've wrestled with men, and you've wrestled with God, and you've overcome. And that's what I want in my people, in my Israelites. Saul becomes Paul. Cephas, pebble, becomes Peter, rock. On and on and on. God is about names because it's relational, because it's intimate, because it's close. And that's how God wants us to emulate and to react. We are to care for one another and for our fellow creatures and creation. We're to make sure that our world is taken care of. Another thing we can learn from this account is that family is the first God-ordained institution and thus must be protected and valued. We make covenants with one another, not in some contractual sense that I am now legally bound to you and there's this and this and this, but we make covenants where we say, man, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to work for this thing that we're creating together, and that's hard. Doesn't always work out, but we got to at least give the effort, guys. We got to at least do our best to work. And again, marriage is a two-way street. You got to have willing partners on both sides. But our job, our responsibility is to love and to care. And children are not just farm hands. They're folks that we're pouring ourselves into so that they become realized and actualized people. Family. And this church, for many of us, is our primary family. More than our relationships with our biological parents or siblings. Being united with a similar cause, of one heart and one mind, as Philippians 2 says, is to be a family. We're about the love of God. We're about the purpose and meaning of God's kingdom and heaven being placed here on earth in our communities. And then we understand also that overreach or sin comes in our inability to rest in our belovedness. Stan talked about how it's not sin and actual separation, but it's shame and estrangement. We do stupid things. We move outside of the realm of God because we don't know how to rest in the fact that God has made us and we're good. Bible, these stories that shape us are so fundamental. We are people who find ourselves in a story far larger than ourselves. And explicitly and implicitly, we find ourselves being shaped by the stories that we've been told and the stories that we live out. It's important for us to know that who we worship is who we become. If your God is a God of wrath and vengeance, you're going to be empowered and emboldened to be a person of wrath and vengeance. If your God is a God and the world is a world that God put together as one of chaos, one where anything and everything goes, then your life will soon look like that. It's not to say that there's not going to be troubling times, distressing times, times where you feel like you're in the upside down place. But we have a God who wants to be with us to help restore order. Not to cure the situation or the sickness perhaps, but to heal it by bringing it meaning and purpose and allowing community to bind together to solve it, to fix it, to be with one another in it. These stories that shape us, it's so important to get the beginning right. If we start off making it about science, if we start off making it about a textbook instead of a family annual that's been handed down to us to let us know how our people are supposed to act, warts and all, how we're supposed to overcome, how there's a bigger kind of arc to us getting it more and more right, becoming more and more peaceable, becoming more and more opening and invitational and inviting and inclusive and more especially people of love, then we've missed the point of it all. Adam and Eve can be seen as this tale of where it all went wrong. Or it can be seen as this tale that happens to us all, where we leave the simplicity of our childhood and we begin to enter into the maturation of our youth and adulthood. And we're all going to do things wrong. I'll use the word. We're all going to sin and harm ourselves and others. But as we talked about last week, it's not our sin that separates us from God. It's our shame. Our God, throughout all of these scriptures, is a God, as we said last week, who stoops. And for those of you who don't know what that word means, it means bend down. Come to us where we're at. Says, didn't surprise me. I'm God. I've seen this story before. It shouldn't surprise you. You're going to get it wrong sometimes. But get up. You can't sit in the floor in the dirt forever. Let me help pick you up. Understand, just as an infant falls and we don't kick that baby in the back, but instead we clap and say, it's okay, you can do it. And we push them up and we let them wobble forward. And God all the time is like our Heavenly Father saying, come on, Liz. I got you. I love you. There's a hug waiting right here for you. Come on, Jenny. Yeah, you fell down 3 times. Yeah, your diaper's probably full. It's okay. We're going to take care of it. Come on, Nicole. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. No, they do fall down sometimes, but it's okay. Guys, we're not a community who want to spend our identity and want to spend so much time on what we get wrong. Instead, we want to realize and recognize that God has called us beloved, that God has intention and purpose for us, and that if we will allow ourselves to receive that love, we can walk forward. And just like in the creation story, it doesn't go good, 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 bad. It goes good, 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 very good. In other words, we can just get better and better. I love you. God loves you way more than I love you. And we're called to be like Adam and Eve. And that after it all got jacked up, after our boys messed up, Cain and Abel, they had Seth. And Seth did wonderful things. And we guys are just the next chapter in this story. And these stories inform us and they shape us. But the story's out ahead. And we're not living a life predicated upon the assumption of sin, separation, sacrifice, salvation, as in some place away from here. But we live our lives in the fact that, yeah, there's shame that this world wants to put on us. Too often, the church wants to put on us. And because of that shame, we feel estrangement. It's not that God's gone anywhere, but we won't let that love in. But God provides God's presence. God says, you're naked? I ain't worried about that. I made you naked. That's how you came, straight out of the package. But if you can't look at me in the eye because you feel shame, you know what? My presence is going to be here, and I'm going to fashion clothes for you. Not for me, but so that you can feel comfortable. I'll stoop to where you're at to meet you where you can handle it. And when all that happens and we start living in that direction, then the lives we're living are lives of healing. Again, that word salvation, so often translated salvation in the New Testament, is sozo. And it means healing. Not just getting away and escaping earth, but healing. Being fully present in the with God life now. Self-actualization, theosis, deification, whatever your spiritual background wants to call it, sanctification. We're becoming more and more who we were created to be. So that's my prayer for us today. God, we love you, and we're thankful for the stories that you grant us. We thank you for the stories that have shaped us, and we repent of passing them in like a game of telephone where we skew the meaning. Sometimes we do that not because it's ill-intended, not because we're wanting to hurt ourselves or other people, but because that's the only way the story's ever been told to us. And so as we look at these stories that were so foundational and shaping for us, and we look at them with fresh eyes, and we look at them with insight and understand what you were actually trying to convey to us, may we live into our belovedness. May you help us to grow in the ability to love deeper and deeper in the directions of you, ourselves, others, and this creation as a whole. God, we're going to get a lot of things wrong, but if we can be your hands and feet, if we can be your children of love, if you called us to be, then we'll be who we're supposed to be, enacting the story that you intended. Help us to do that today. Whether that's calling someone that we haven't called in a while and we need to make some amends, whether that's asking for forgiveness or whether that's receiving forgiveness, whether that's loving someone who is really hard to love, may you remind us that we're built like you to stoop. Not to get to someone's level in some kind of base way or bad fashion, but in the same way that we kneel down so that we're eye to eye with our kids. Help us to love. Teach us to love. Inspire us to love. Empower us to love. In the strong name of the Son of God, our Jesus, we say, heck yeah. Amen. Grove, love you. Remember, we've got youth tonight. Remember, we've got family movie night. We've got pub theology this week. Tons and tons and tons. Be praying for our teachers and our students going back to school. And we love you. Have a good day.